we've structured it a little bit differently, so hopefully you're watching this video and taking some good notes, and we will talk about all the materials you are going to need first. You can use a tape measure, standard tape measure, or a ruler, some foil, measuring spoons, a quart size mason jar, a cookie sheet, and obviously your soil. And I just took this soil from my front yard this morning. And the last thing you will need is some dish soap. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take some foil, and line your baking sheet. And it doesn't have to be a cookie sheet. It can be a glass pan, a Pyrex, anything like that. And begin to slowly add your soil to your sheet. And you'll actually be able to see the difference between a soil that was just harvested or collected, and also you will actually be able to see the difference between one that has been already put in the oven. So we're going to put it in the oven to sterilize it, and what that does is that allows for any of the microorganisms, because we're using our kitchens, any of the microorganisms to be baked out of it and essentially killed off, so it cannot harm you or your family members. And this will also give you a better result in testing your particulates, your sand, silt, and clay particles. So this will actually really help when it comes to doing that. So I'm going to preheat my oven to 200. And by doing so, 200 is a nice manageable temperature. It doesn't bake off too quickly. It doesn't allow anything to burn. Remember, you're still going to have a little bit of organic matter in there. And I am going to put this in the oven at 200 degrees for 30 minutes. Here you have on your right, you have the soil that was just collected this morning. And then this is after 30 minutes of baking at 200 degrees. You can definitely tell the difference in moisture content. So here we have our soil that is full of moisture that hasn't gone in the oven yet. And this soil has just recently come out after about 30 minutes in the oven and then 5 minutes of cool time. And into the measuring phase, you're going to take your mason jar with your fresh out of the oven soil, and you are going to add a third of a jar of soil. And remember, this is a quart-sized jar. And this will allow for the next part of our experiment, our lab today, when we're going to actually talk about the different size of the particulates, and this will also allow you to see everything on a bigger scale. You can use a smaller jar, it's just harder to get your results, harder to measure, because we're going to measure this. That was the whole point of the tape measure and the ruler. And then one more scoop here. And there we go. We've got about a third of a jar. We're now going to take our liquid. You can just fill out of the sink. I am just using this because I don't have to go off camera. So here we have our soil, and we're going to fill up our soil and water now, and we're going to fill it up almost all the way to the top. And here comes the fun part, the part that everyone seems to enjoy. You can already see some of the organic matter floating to the top, and that's what's going to happen throughout the whole thing. But you're just going to give it a nice shake, and you're going to have to shake constantly, continually, for 5 minutes. And if you ever set it down or stop, you're going to have to restart shaking to allow everything to settle properly. Mixing now at about 2 minutes. I'm going to add my dish soap. And the dish soap allows for the different layers, the sand, the silt, and the sand, silt, and clay particles to separate. That will definitely help with that. So, mixing now at about 2 minutes. I'm going to add my dish soap. And the dish soap allows for the different layers, the sand, the silt, and the sand, silt, and clay particles to separate. That will definitely help with that. The soap is added. It's right back to shaking. And you're going to want to make sure you're shaking really, really well. Okay, all different directions, up and down, back and forth, and you'll actually see the soap actually beginning to work after the first couple minutes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have been shaking now for 5 minutes. We are going to wait before we measure at least 1 minute. The coarse sand particles will settle out first, followed by the darker, finer silt, and last will be the lighter, superfine clay, while organic matter will float. If you wait until everything has settled, it can be hard to sort out, which is why we want to make identifications earlier rather than later. So to make your identification easier, mark the sand level on the jar after about 1 minute, and you can see that what it looks like after my jar looks like after 1 minute of sitting. The silt level you'll mark after 4 to 6 hours, and the clay level will be after 2 days. So you can see the difference. It's going to take a few days to finish this lab. Now, this is how we calculate soil percentages. Once the soil has all settled and you have determined it's been the 2 days and you've determined that it's ready to measure, you're going to take your ruler or your tape measure and you're going to measure the entirety of the sample. There should be 3 layers of sand, silt, and then clay. You're going to measure all 3 of those and come up with the number in inches. So in order to calculate the percentage, you're going to divide the depth of each layer of soil by the total soil depth in the jar and multiply by 100. So for example, if your entire sample was 5 inches tall and 3 inches of that was sand, you would divide 3 by 5, which is 60%, and that will help you with the next portion. And if you had 1 inch of silt, you would know that would be 20%, and then 1 inch of clay, and that would also be 20% to make up a total of 100%. So, using our example, if we go to our sand, silt, and clay, or our soil texture pyramid, we would say that our soil had 60% sand. And as we look at this soil texture pyramid, we see sand is at the bottom of our pyramid. So I go to the 60% sand, and it had 20% clay. So I would move across from left to right in the clay section. So right now we're currently sitting at a sandy loam, and then it also had 20% silt. So I would come down from the 20% and follow this little checkered line down to where they all met. And you are in the area of sandy loam or a sandy clay loam. So that's something to keep in mind as you do your measurements. As always, just ask if you have any questions and I'll be more than happy to help. Thanks, guys.